Welcome to our meetup. Today we are talking about AI agents in a banking context. The idea behind this discussion is that the topic of AI agents came in with full force this year and took a lot of people by surprise. When that happens with any new technology, there's obviously a lot of conversation surrounding it. Within those conversations, there are sometimes concerns, misunderstandings, and maybe even a little bit of fear surrounding this technology and its capabilities. What we've specifically seen is that there are a lot of concerns facing financial service executives when it comes to AI agents in a bank. So we thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about AI agents, what they are, and lay a clear foundation for how they can be safely integrated into a bank. Jay is going to be leading our discussion today. This session is being recorded and the recording is available on YouTube. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. We are monitoring the chat throughout the session. With that being said, I am going to hand over to Jay. Take it away.
Thanks, Maggie. Let me just... So it's not just about today. It's about some thoughts on the fear of AI and the role the human plays in the context of figuring out how to deal with continuous automation. And that's, I think, probably more the theme, isn't it, Madison? Because like we discussed in one of our previous meetups, we discussed how agents can be used, what it is, and the architecture. What we might want to do in the future, if we get some feedback from the audience, is that we can show how you can build one in 10 minutes and how to create agents with tools, how to access them, how to orchestrate them. And we can do it in two ways. We can use the ecogentic approach to show how we have been able to abstract all the complexities. And we can do another one if you wanted to building it all yourself, or if you get your favorite AI to write it all for you. So we've got a theme for today, isn't it? We've got to kind of think about how the human in a system interacts with automated work that is enabled through AI. The thing about a human is that it is a carrier of a genetic code. It is a biological system that comes with an holistic intelligence system. That means it is not just the brain, and it's not just the blood flow through your veins. It is not just your genetic system telling you, how to behave and what it is, and the fact that you continue to breathe without telling yourself that you have to do it. There's no activation function telling you that you have to go do the following thing. You have to tell your heart to pump, you have to tell your kidneys to work, and all those kind of capabilities. So that means that there is something still pretty important about the biological system called the human in the way that we see AI. Because we are an emotional being, and because we carry emotions and thinking, every time something new comes along that feels like us, we get scared on the one end and we get excited on the other end. So there's always this kind of interplay between these two worlds. If you think about what happened in the 1950s, the early days of AI and the discussion around it, there was this entire focus on the self-similar being, the fact that there's this humanoid that looks like us, behaves like us, and there was this kind of vision that it's going to be able to sense, to receive, to respond, to think, to behave, all of these things during the 50s. But then, as we thought everything calmed down during the 60s, humans got scared again. And this time it was about large computing and automation and the storage of data, and the fact that everything in the business is going to be automated. And what are these armies of people going to do that are working in these halls, processing the pink slips, the blue slips, the green slips in the back office of the bank? And as we know, the consequence is that we employed more people over more regions doing more automation, and it just complicated the story even further. So then, as we hit the 70s, things really got to the front, because now you had gaming in the early days of the PC, kind of like just as we start the PC era in the late 70s going into the 80s. And as we hit the 80s, we had, Terminator, and we had all of those. Every wave, this created this immense fear of what's new and what's going to change. At the end of the day, it's all still the same. Humans want something that will make their lives better. We want to perform certain actions, not just through the data that we store, but the data that we retrieve and the data that we execute. By the time we got to the 2000s, things really came to the fore, because now we've already solved the Turing test. We've already solved many of the capabilities that we thought AI would never get to do in the first place. Now there are tools available. They're publicly available, they're freely available, and the bank or the financial institution or the telecommunications company, whatever large institution you work in, now has access to a lot of these technologies in order to think about how the role of the human is changing. So that means that as you think about this, can I use the weakness of, let's say, a generative model to turn it into its strength? Because we know that in an origin of agents, the concept is that because it's not a good information retrieval system, it is enormously important and very good at determining the intent of a conversation, working out the sequence of actions that if I give it a series of questions or a specific instruction, it is pretty good at picking out and figuring out what the next set of actions would be. And that essentially set the agentic process in motion. So does that mean we're going to automate all of what humans do? Some of what humans do? None of what some humans do? How are we going to decide where this gets implemented? Because at the end of the day, can you run a bank with one human that orchestrates one AI super agent that's got thousands of agents doing all the work of the entire organization or not? And I think that's the question we should unpack today, isn't it? I mean, we want to try to figure out, if there may be an answer, and we're going to present a framework later to show that you can think about this. At the end of this weekly show, this was published by MIT in 2017, and one of the editors there wrote a series of notes as to, if you had to define what AI is, what would you put in a definition? I love this chart because it gives you a very good angle on figuring out all the parts that normally would be affected by you thinking about what an artificial intelligence, not a human or genetic intelligence, would do for you. The first thing is, can it see something reliably and continuously? So that means that if I had to take a bank statement to my bank or to a company that I want to get a contract on, can it reliably figure out that it's my identity, or that it's my bank statement, or that it's my proof of address for my KYC? The reason is that I want to be able to pick up what I'm seeing. Can it do that reliably? And if it can it do a proper identification, classification, and can I then use what I extract from that? The other thing is that, can I hear something? So that means that, can I take sound or a voice recording or a conversation that I'm having? And if it's a voice, is there a way to extract if the person is angry, upset, happy, or confused if you're having a conversation with a customer? The other thing is, can it read? I can have a conversation and have a next token, making it practical for me to get to an outcome. These are the areas where things get interesting. Can it move? And if it cannot move, can I give it AI to make it move? So that means that, can I get my car, my chair, my drone, my wheelchair, my bicycle, whatever it is, can I enable it? And if I can enable it, can it do it entirely on its own, or does it require some assistance? And then the final thing, as part of a broader definition, is to say, well, can it reason? And this is the area that I think we are all focusing on, the phase that we're moving into. Is there a way that we can figure out the patterns of behavior that the engine, whatever you design as your engine, can reliably extract what your intent is, what your target is, what you're going to need as an input to produce these series of outputs to get work done? Because if you think of the definition of work means that I take a source or an input, put it through a series of steps in a constrained environment to get something done, and it produces an output that is different to the input. Otherwise, why did I work in the first place? So I take raw material, water, and some soda, and whatever. I put it through a bottling machine, and I spit out a Coca-Cola at the end. I put as an input some money, and I put as a loan as the output as a bank. The idea is, how do you bring these areas together? If we start there, we clearly see where the agent, or the concept of something doing work for you, can intelligently or semi-intelligently interpret what you are doing and then act on it. So that's maybe how to think about that. Donald, it's been a long time. I just saw you.
Hi,
How's London?
Yeah, warm
Very
today. Lovely.
Very nice. Okay, Maddie, should I then get into some of the detail?
Yes, but before you jump into any details, I really enjoyed the way you started talking about the different phases of technology and what humans have been scared of. I wanted to ask, or if you could comment or kind of talk about this quickly, is in an interview recently, Jeffrey Hinton, who I believe is termed the godfather of AI, spoke about AI agents and how he specifically used the word scarier because AI agents can now do things. They don't just answer questions. So I was hoping you could give us a comment on that.
So Jeff Hinton worked on an algorithm called backpropagation. And the basic concept is that if you know nothing about a certain situation, you form an opinion based on your existing experiences. Let's say you're going to a cooking lesson, you update all of what you used to believe to be true about that, not just the condition under which you do it, the actions that you perform, the things you produce and output, and you update all of what you know. It's called backpropagation, and you update the scores of the things that you know and don't know. And he's been working on that for a long time. The challenge is that if you only work on the core of the algorithm, and the algorithm's job is to do deep learning, because deep learning is an algorithm that takes input data, go through layers, work through a number of epochs, go through a way in which you encode data sets, and encoding at the end of it can either be a generative model or discriminative model. So that means you can use it either for classification problems and the like. So is this a dog or a cat? Is this J or not? Or whatever it might be, like you open your phone. And if it's generative model, it takes this input and produces the output. So I think what is scaring the older generation, and even he himself saying that, listen, I'm in my 70s now and I'm taking it easier, if you listen to his latest interviews. It's a bit like if you speak to Noam Chomsky as a linguist, say, I cannot believe this thing has got no intelligence. It's completely useless to me because it cannot create words that I can. But yet, if you are not them, how useful is it to you? Firstly. And secondly, if you are the person who worked on an algorithm and you then see it being deployed across the entire globe, across thousands of different models, and you see that it can be used to orchestrate intelligent and non-intelligent work to a certain outcome, you might not completely understand what all the consequences are. And then you claim that I'm scared. Maybe I'm a rational optimist. The optimist in me saying that if I had to think about working with my banking clients, highly risk averse, that you have to be because you're regulated. You have to think about your customers that and protect it. You have to make sure everything is secure. You have to make sure that you engage continuously and more reliably. So I'm more on that side of the fence, if that makes sense.
I think the good it can do and the potential. I really like it.
Yes, that's more my angle on this. Let's get into the story of agentic. The concept of an agent has been around for a long time. AI agents have not been around for that long. If you think about how this works, a prompt is a context given to a generative model that performs a task and gives you an answer. If you take it to the next step, it means that you're able to take that approach and translate it in identifying tools, using memory, and then figuring out how I can reason about what I need to produce as an output and then produce an output. Okay, so I want to be able to calculate my customer's spend personality automatically. So if I ask an agent, can you please determine my spend personality and recommend a future financial journey to me? What it needs to do is it needs to figure out who I am, get my score, find all of the messaging related to me, and maybe even produce a financial budget for me. How will it do that from a single prompt? These models are pretty good at generating output. So if you design an agent system, you want it to be able to take that single prompt, break it up into the actions. That means that there are multiple intents. Take those multiple intents, map it to the tooling, take the memory of what I'm taking from one tool to the next, pick up my personality and retain it, pick up my messages and retain it, take those together and make a financial recommendation, make me a recommendation for a loan or for an overdraft, whatever it is on my account, and then make me a recommendation at the end. Means that the agent system uses the tooling to deal with accurate and precise output. It uses generative system for the linguistic flow, for something that historically used to take an enormous amount of effort for companies to figure out. It used to have, banks that have thousands of steps to get this done. And you want to be able to automate that. And that's the basis of a lot of the agentic story. Cheers.
So my question is
I think one that's on the forefront of a lot of people's minds that deal with spaces in their businesses that require certain rules to be in place with regards to messaging. So you've spoken about how the agent goes and fetches your messaging, but then you also spoke about how there's that linguistic generation as well. If you're using an AI agent or generative capabilities, does that exclusively mean that you must be generating the messages that you're sending on the fly, or is it that you can actually?
Exactly. So the thing is that you want to be able to separate. And if I can maybe just ask you to hold on to that for a little bit longer, at the end of the talk, what I'll do is I'll show the kind of difference on the continuum between being linguistically useful and being incredibly accurate and precise. So if I want to be able to pick up Jess's personality type, that is an algorithm that calculates it highly reliably, or I want to pick up how many accounts you have with my bank, or I want to pick up what your inflow and outflows in the last month. That has nothing to do with generative. It's got to do with the fact that I need the facts to be extracted, but I can create an AI tool that does it for me based on an instruction that is linguistic. So that means your linguistic capabilities translate into acts of work, and the acts of work use a tool, and the tool accesses what you need to access. So there's a thinking process we want to apply. By the time we bring the various pieces together, and let's say it makes a mistake, you want to bring a human into the loop. So that means that if you set up an adversarial approach where you have multiple models acting on the work and one does not agree with the other, you stop the process and escalate it to a human to intervene. The moment you do that, you update the prompt in real time, so it's only the instruction that changes. But if you have a regulated message that goes to a customer and you're not allowed to, let's say, give advice, there's no ways you ever want to generate that on the fly. You want to use maybe AI to generate it prior to the review process. Then you save it and then use that in a dynamic engine to render a review, like in our case, our dynamic interactions engine. It will help you figure out what is great for the customer and what is not. So that means taking an algorithmic approach, a static model approach that you can learn from historical priors, dynamic approaches can dynamically converge, and a generative approach. They each have their own place in your basket of capabilities to get work automated. So I think that, yeah, maybe that's the way to think about it. But maybe the end of that is just to think about it like, if you had to think of the generic concept of the agentic ecosystem, the first thing is that you want to be able to start with this orchestrating a number of agents. So that means taking step 1, step 2, step 3, bringing them together and making them work. By the time you deal with derived agents or hierarchy of agents, you probably end up with something that deals with pre and post conditions. If I don't have enough information and I cannot extract it from memory, do I then need to intervene with a human to say that I have not been able to obtain certain details? You cannot get that from you, all the way through to having a multitasking base agent system. You kind of work in and out of this capability until you have an entire configuration that works in your context to get a job done. So that means you might end up with your agent system and a manager of agents that deal with the analysis and the checking and the planner. The planner on the one end is an agentic framework. In our world, we use the eco-agentic journeys, and the eco-agentic metadata tells you then what's possible and what's not. Am I allowed to do X versus Y or not? You can guide the interaction to make sure that it's correct. If a message gets generated and it gets added, or some kind of offer gets generated, you want to make sure that if you want to do, let's say, dynamic pricing, it's highly, highly unlikely that you're going to do that in a generative capability. It's very likely you're going to use an algorithmic capability that deals with the thresholds, that's got potentially your actuarial maps to calculate within the variation. Then you're going to take those results and morph it into something to make it linguistically consumable. And I think that bringing these worlds together is what often is not understood. And that is that there is no just one size fits all. I'm going to deploy the entire world, taking my generative model and make it work. We have not seen that at all. And actually, we've not seen a single capability where that concept is going to fly. You have to have a framework where you bring all of the elements together. So that's maybe the way to think about it.
We have 3 questions in the chat from Adrian, and they're all quite technical.
Okay, let me get my cursor from one machine to the next.
I could maybe talk to some of them as
Question
well.
1, to what degree answers convergence to optimum solutions? What factors impact the optionality feasibility of solutions, and to what degree errors can propagate in models? Okay, well, that's for an entire day. It would have been amazing to discuss this in detail, but basically the concept of the convergence, or the concept of how models will converge over time, remember, it's a mathematical construct. A generative model has no understanding of it. So in our world, if we want a model to converge in a situation where there are human dynamics, and that means that high degrees of volatility in interaction, you can set the convergence of the model based on number of interactions. You can set it based on the time window. You can set it based on a number of parameters that will then decide how quickly the model will converge to what popular is and what's and what it's not. If you want to then include exploration, or you want to find a way to deal with alternative or optimally feasibility of solutions, you then need to decide if it's cold start or warm start. And if it's cold start, are you then going to put it onto a distribution? Are you going to deal with randomization, like using epsilon greedy or some other mechanisms? So that is a way bigger problem, and maybe an entire meetup in question 1. So that is maybe just a short answer to that. The second one is mental models. A simple error or weight in the thinking tends to increase the probability of occurrence of errors in such models. Yes, it is an enormous risk, and I think you're really hitting it quite close to the generative world's nerve there, in that if you provide the thinking and you use the chain of thought as a way to define your prompt, and expect a generative model to perform an analytical job, it is incredibly sensitive to the framework, the way you describe it, to the kind of prompt that you use, to the task that you set for it to execute on. Because we are so scared of making a mistake, especially when it comes to a client life in the context of financial services, or in some way that it's going to affect their money, we normally would perform any of those actions algorithmically, because we can control it, we can explain it, we understand why it's doing what it's doing, and then we map it into the generative model, and we tell the model what the mental model is to explain it or discuss it, rather than to generate it. So we bring a different set of worlds together to make sure we can deal with the risk averseness that we definitely have to adhere with. And then what is the probability of hallucinations to appear? What is interesting about this, Adrian, what I always find, especially in the context of being a very technical person, is that people say, well, a generative model hallucinates. Well, no, hallucination was Eliot's phrase to publicly tell people that the model is really not designed at its core to be an information retrieval system. It is not an intellectual lookup capability. There is no link. By the time you look at the latent space and you refer back to the origin of its knowledge, it has no understanding of that connection. No generative model today does that. That's why augmented generation and all those capabilities are in place, because the model cannot. The current architecture of all of what you see in a generative world, the current architecture is not capable of doing reliable knowledge retrieval. It's an enormous popularity contest. So that means that if the input tokens have got a certain version of the truth, the latent space would have captured that version. So if you ask what radical innovation is, and you go back to Clayton Christensen, or you ask it, like the case that I often use, I've got a book called Built to Thrive from many years ago, and it's available at academia.edu. It's available on Amazon and on all bunch of online sites. I know that it's indexed because I haven't turned it off. When I ask what a megawave is, it has no understanding of it. It has to go to the internet to perform intellectual lookup to provide me the reference. So that means that you have to understand, and we really agonize over this, is that generative models' primary purpose is to generate linguistic output based on linguistic capabilities. It is not an information retrieval system or an intellectual retrieval system. So that's why the concept of an hallucination is at its core of its capability. But if you take that and you apply it to something like figuring out the steps to get a job done, it turns out that it's incredibly effective, because its job is not to find you the facts. Its job is to figure out the concept of the facts. It generates a next token on the fly as you ask it. It has no understanding of what the total answer is. The way that human intellect works, that you have an inherent understanding of a certain field. AI is intelligence. It's not understanding. And I think that does create some confusion around how some of these things get deployed. If you don't take this capability, the fact that it is good at generating next steps, outputs, and your prompt, especially your systems prompt versus your user prompt, is designed in a way that you can get it to perform a number of actions. Let's just think about the layers of automation. The first layer, we automate without AI. Click, 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 getting the job done, right? Or write the program procedurally, if then else, get the job done. We know that it's been done for a long time. The next level, if you start using generative AI, and now what I want to do is, can I detect your intent reliably and act on the intent? And at the moment, many chatbots that we've seen, people have done it entirely through prompting, rather than doing it through determining if the person is interested in acquiring details about something or giving feedback to the mechanism. When you go low autonomy agentic workflows, can take a number of autonomous agents and wire them together. It uses a template that has already been given, and it has to stick to the guideline. That is how you stop the concept of an hallucination. Remember what an hallucination is in AI world? It's called a confident, incorrect response. The reason why it's designed to give a confident, incorrect response is because the job is to probabilistically determine the next viable token based on the cost function, not based on its information lookup capabilities. By the time we get to level 4, it's when you deal with entire workflows. Level 5 is the one that we all think about, and that means highly autonomous workflow, where I give it a single instruction and it has to do all the work for me. Now, think about this in the context of a bank. Let's say that I apply for a mortgage, I apply for a loan, or I want to ask if my transaction has been processed successfully in my credit card. Let's take the different scenarios. You just inherited a ton of money. Are you going to get an AI agent to figure out exactly how to move from automation without AI? So that means a biological system assisting you, one human to another. Are you willing to take a highly autonomous agentic workflow and let it go figure out exactly which instrument, which geography, which country, which amount, push it out into that portfolio and make a decision and let the AI explain everything to you without having a face-to-face conversation? Initial research shows that the role of the human in the system is amplified when the degree of personal risk increases. If there's zero perceived risk, and I want an agent to book me an airline ticket, I know it's something I understand well. I go to booking.com, hotels.com, I go to my favorite airline, I go to my Google search, I do whatever I need to do. I know the mechanical steps myself. I might ask it to do the entire thing for me, and I just approve it at the end. So that means the role that the human plays through the entire ecosystem is shifting radically. And that's why we need a framework to figure out what that is going to look like in the future. And I think that's the entry point of our next part of the conversation, isn't it, Maddie? Okay,
Yeah,
let me jump into this. I don't know if anybody saw this. Chase Bank has been publishing a couple of open letters, and this is the one that caught my eye. Well, listen, there are a couple of others, and I just picked this one as a starting point. They're basically saying that to all of their third-party providers, that modern software as a service means that you have a capability that you have automated that somebody can access through a user interface like a web front end, and they can access it through an API. As soon as you can do that, that can be wrapped into a tool that sits aside an agent to do work for you. The question is, do I add a lot of security or don't I? What JP Morgan Chase published literally a day ago is an open letter to all of our vendors. We recommend that you think first and foremost about security over rushing the features. We are in trouble, you are in trouble, and we will make sure that nobody ever uses you again. We must modernize our security architectures because there's very little being done in a lot of the AI agents. The agent becomes a free flow for all to access everything in a lot of corporates. And that means that the security practitioner must work with the rest of the organization. Now think about model as a service. That is the latest model focus, the latest service focus. If I go to Grok with a Q, or I go to DeepSeek, or I go to OpenAI, or any of those companies, what do they do? Not just with the knowledge that I provide for the prompt to work. Where does that go? That means that inside, outside the enterprise barrier is an enormous conversation in our banking clients, because they say that we just will not let it happen. So that's why a lot of sandbox projects are going on. And as soon as it hits production, the risk guys, the fraud people, everybody are basically saying there's no ways you're taking this forward. And that means that you have to make sure different options have to be available to the client. So that means self-hosting. You bring your own cloud, or you find a way to protect your data entirely ring-fenced from what the outside world can see. So that means on-site hosted models and so on seems to be a huge focus again for debates today. It hasn't been historically. And we know the world's largest banks are rethinking, saying that, do I really want to use, let's say, Azure, with a model guard, or Bedrock with AWS, or I want to use, Google's model, I want to use Hugging Face or any one of those publicly available, because I know they all create leaks into the world. If we are caught or get into trouble for that, do I really want to put up with that? So the question is, that thinking of not just the human interface, but understanding the model capability has to be part of your reasoning to figure out what's going to work for you. So Forrester published this report, and we're not going to have a chance to go through the detail. But if you have to think about the embeddedness of AI, it's now embedded in every phone call that you make, every video call that you make. What does Microsoft do with your Teams transcription once you've done that? If you read the license agreement, it's pretty vague, because that data probably ends up getting into a language model that gets trained to make it more reliable. So that means that where those interfaces are completely foreign to most of our clients. And that means you need to ask the supplier, how do you safeguard these models? How do you limit the sessions, the length rates, what people are allowed to ask or not, what they have access to? Are you monitoring? Are you understanding exactly where the dangerous situations are that you're involved in, and what kind of data leakage is taking place? I think there's a huge fear in our client base around these issues. That's why we see that most architectures are not designed to be multifaceted. Multifaceted means that there are generic capabilities where agents can operate, but as soon as it accesses a model that is outside of the ring-fence security, they want to bring it in-house, or they want to have a company or somebody they can work with to make sure that it's completely private and secure. So that means if you look at these like impaired fairness, customer journeys, conclusions, coding, it can affect a number of different situations in the business. This is just a map, great to help you understand where all the security threats are, and it's basically scattered across your entire organization. What if you have a developer that writes code using an AI that adds a vulnerability that you are not aware of, use a dependency that has never been checked and has not gone through your normal security? You don't know what the outcomes are. So that means that the accountability is still centered around the human. The human with the tool still makes the human accountable. And I think that is one of the core messages that we've seen coming out of our clients in the banking world. I don't care if you use AI or not, but you personally are accountable. You can never say to me, it was somebody else's problem. This is your problem. And I think that's maybe one of the things that have to make sense. I saw a hand, maybe.
Yes.
Me, I put my hand up and then put it down again. As you were talking, it's part of the narrative we talk about. It's to do more than just choosing one. Static models, they're a thing of the past, right? And then we had this introduction of dynamic models, particularly within our world. Your static, dynamic, and generative models all functioning collaboratively in particular areas seems like the best way forward.
You make a comment that I'm still trying to hold on to. Maybe it's my age or whatever. The computational efficiency of using an unsupervised algorithm like k-means to determine the clusters in a large data set, it's unparalleled. And it's still being used by every major media company, tech company, whatever, to quickly find commonalities in large data sets that are tabular. A generative model probably could do it. It doesn't mean that it should, because of the cost and the time and everything that goes with that. So that's why I think you're absolutely right. And that is that you're normally going to have a multitude of different approaches to solve one predictive problem. And that will continue for the foreseeable future until we come up with a new architecture that can create an explainable mathematical model that can reliably and continuously produce a result I can take back to my risk committee, to my review committee, to people that are going to have a look at it to tell me that, yes, it's supposed to do what it's supposed to do. So now let's look at this framework, right? This is called the Epoch framework. It's been, for those who go this search for Epoch, you'll see there's a bunch of content on this. But let's think about it for a moment. Empathy, presence, opinion, creativity, hope in the context of humans, and how you decide, and let's take a slightly different view on this whole story. How do I decide what the role of the human really is? Because we have a lot of understanding technically because it's well-defined, well-described, it's algorithmically automated in the context of AI algorithms or machine learning algorithms or various types of ways in which you can automate whatever forecast or generative capability you want to create. But we don't have that well of an understanding of how the human functions in this new world. So what part of this entire execution makes the human irreplaceable? For now. Because I think, as you know, and go back to Hinton's notes and comments, every wave is going to produce something where we replace the human or get certain actions to be done better. You know, if your job was to call a friend from some TV show, now you just go into an AI that you linked Wiki as your knowledge provider, and it finds what you need to find. But that means that these areas, so let's look at empathy and emotional intelligence, specifically related to a human, makes us quite unique. You could tell an AI to behave a little bit like that, but it is fictitious behavior. It is not dealing with the way that you can immediately determine context of your environment. Now let's look at presence, network, connectedness. When you sit in front of a person, another human, or you are in a workshop having a conversation, can that be replaced by you just doing it with AI at home? Turns out that probably not, but we'll get into that now. Let's think about opinion and judgment and ethics. If you have to make a judgment about another person's life, about their existence, about their job, about something that's going to affect them, the AI is, if it's designed to be accurate and precise, it'll go find an algorithm, get a result back and tell you no. It won't have any empathy or understanding if you bring those two worlds together, especially empathy with judgment or with ethics. And then by the time we get to creativity and imagination, many of these models already automate a lot of it. We do know that there is no concept in any kind of intelligence other than what we understand our intelligence is. And that is the fact that we've got hope, we've got vision, and we've got an ability to set a target for the future and deliver on it. AI works highly mechanically. It is not got a deep understanding of this. So let's look at the first one. If it's empathetical, AI can respond to emotional cues pretty reliably. It knows how to deal with things like anger and happiness. Say you run an insurance organization and you deal with policies that were funeral policies or people that have had life insurance, and your spousal, kind of relationship ends up playing out into them phoning you and asking questions about certain things. There is no concept of in the moment contextual assessment of what's going on and acting on it. By the time a person feels sad, you can detect it like we do in our business. Part of our job is to detect emotional states, personalities, and the like. By the time you need to respond to it, I need to think about, is that human really got a true empathetic? Because an engine could make up almost any feeling you like. The question is, if a human calibrates a model for empathy, will it do it reliably, correctly? Will it know how to do that in a way that's going to give the right answers? We still see a role for the human when there's emotional intelligence needed in interactions. If somebody is going to sit in front of a doctor, I also sometimes speak to my financial advisor face-to-face. There's an interaction, an experiential component, and a component of you being able to look another biological system in the eye. Even though AI probably could replace a lot of this, it does create a big question, is that if the human is augmented with the tools, you are still the carrier of the message. It's not just coming from somebody's algorithm. By the time I deal with human-to-human idea exchange, can I deal with a reliable interaction of how that's done, and especially in the context of, let's say, advice that is given on whatever the situation is. So even if a doctor uses an AI to diagnose you, you are highly likely to still want it delivered via a human if it's bad news, or somebody that's going to, in the moment, and contextually assess you to see if it is a good way to speak to you. Now let's think about the concept called gut feel. There is no framework in AI to deal with this. If some situation, some geographical location makes you uncomfortable as a person, and you feel you don't want to be there, there is no neurological or human description for that situation other than maybe qualitative research that was done. So you cannot reproduce that reliably in an AI. You cannot say to the AI, under these conditions, if you see the following, make sure your gut feeling is X rather than Y. Or make sure that the moral consideration of you performing a certain action has to favor one situation versus another. As soon as you have that complex situation, it's difficult to augment that into the AI story. The next one is to anticipate consequences. Because most of the language tools are just token generators, There's a deep inability to determine consequence. And humans, in most cases, if you're a professional who's been in a certain job, and let's say you're a doctor or a banker or an advisor, you have got a deep understanding of the consequences of the actions that you are taking. You can assess it in a moment and then respond to that. And that means that by the time you then automate it, can the AI replace all of that or not? You need to think about the situation where it fits and where it doesn't. If you think of concepts like novelty, remember, AI is trained on historical data. It has nothing novel in it. The novelty will come from humans doing things that the next round of models will be trained on. It might be novel to you if you don't know what has been done for the person who really wants to differentiate themselves, the person who's really curious. And if you think about the concept of curiosity is a trait in a human. It's uniquely animalistic or humanistic. That means we want to go see what's on that side of the fence. We want to try different things, and it's inherent from our childhood. And AI has no childhood. Has no understanding of that. So that means you need to see if your process that you're working on business needs that. And if it needs improvisation, it makes it even more complicated. And it doesn't matter what you do with your AI, and especially if you're in a regulated field, you want as little improvisation as possible rather than a lot of it. And by the end of it, you want to make sure that when it performs acts of design, are those in line with what I need to do? Goal setting is a bit of a gray area. Because if the human sets the goal for the AI generator or the agent system to figure out its own goal to get the job done as quickly as possible, reliably as possible, or with as much data access as possible, it will have some understanding of what goal orientation is. But goal orientation of a goal that is unachievable, that's a big hack. Remember the big, hairy, audacious goals from the book Built to Last? Wasn't that from the previous era? You set these big, hairy, audacious goals. Those are intrinsically humanistic. You have a vision that you want to achieve, a differentiation. And AI has no understanding of that. And that means that by the time you want to set the purpose, the AI has no purpose. Its only purpose is to calculate the next token probabilistically based on its cost function. So you need to translate it. By the time you think about motivation, the motivation is cost function and reliability of the next probabilistic token. So that means that at the end of this, you have to bring the traits in your agentic world of the humans and the value of the human, bring those traits together with what you want to do in your agentic ecosystem, and those together will give you a sense of reality. Because we definitely see that every time we've gone through one of these, the pendulum swings in different directions. So it swings to, we're going to automate everything, and other we're going to automate nothing. The human can only do this. And we know that somewhere in the middle, there's a reality. If you think about some of these traits, things like compassion, altruism, camaraderie, the way in which we interact and do critical thinking, but we reasoning on something entirely new. We deal with how we deal with originality, and or the last point, maybe how we deal with us doing it on our own, or belonging, feeling belonging somewhere else. AI has none of those traits. So what we're just saying is that you have to be careful when you bring these two together.
I know we only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask if it can be brief, but I wanted to ask if, you're talking about bringing the human qualities and the agentic capabilities together. Are there any kind of practical examples, or is there an example you can give us now very quickly where we are seeing that?
Madison, I'll take a 3-minute, 50-second view on this. I know we've been working on this. How do you create a business-focused impact? How do you create something that that's going to have? That means that you have to have reliable intent detection. Intent meaning that if the human is giving me an action to perform, can I reliably detect the single intent that is coming out of that instruction? If it's convoluted, if it's confusing, if I don't understand it, you must reject it and wait for the response. Then, how do I map this intent to an instrument? The instrument is an agent with a tool. If I know that I need to go and find my customers' data and update their details, I need the instrument to figure out what that needs to be. And once the action gets performed, I want to be able to measure it and track it and know that it's reliable. So I think that concept has to land first before you're going to get an agentic system to work for you. That means the larger complexity is that by the time you design the sequences, it's not just, I'm going to design some free flow conversation with a banking client, make advice, decide on a product loan, decide on the term, decide on a... No, you are an institution who knows I'm selling this at this price to this kind of person with these traits. The role that the AI plays is quite carefully orchestrated. And you need a way in which you can bring those sequences together to decide what part you set the rules and what part not. On the one hand, you've got something that is accurate. On the other side, you've got something that's linguistically usable. When you bring these two worlds together, the linguistic interaction, what is my latest balance? How many times have I spent money on food? Can I apply for a mortgage? Is linguistically useful. It needs to translate that using an intent engine into something accurate. If I get my loan system to recommend a loan to me with a specific term and a price, I must be able to say, thank you, accept it. And the contract should be in motion. It mustn't now go back and go through the entire cycle again. So you need to bring these worlds together of what's explainable and usable. And that means that if you then set up, in our world, if you think about, Madison, the ecogentic graph, you can decide how strict you want the rules to be, how loose you want the rules to be, how much chat, but you will never give advice unless it's within your regulatory framework. You'll never, ever recommend a product unless a client can really afford it or it fits within their profile. You're never going to recommend a term, duration of a loan, an interest rate, a repay cycle, or even the fact that they have access to just accepting the loan unless you have regulatory approval for that. That's going to give you an accurate result that you bolt into your agentic framework. And we believe that in the agentic graph, we figured that out because you got not just the human augmentation, you got various elements that need to come together for it to work properly. So that means if I put the whole journey together, I want to make sure the tasks are accurate, the data gets extracted when I need to. I want to make sure the journey controls are in place and free chat options are determined in the right way. I want to make sure that the automation of those steps are guardrailed to make sure that the human augmentation, even if the human says something, the AI can check the human and the human can check the AI both. And at the end, you want to make sure that there's a reliable intent, zero tolerance conversation. So you don't want the person to go places that's going to get you into trouble. And you want to make sure that you have a framework that can do this for you. Have a clear concept of the capabilities used in agentic AI. Know how the sequences are created, know how the interfaces work, know how the language is going to work, understand the guardrail framework that you're going to be putting in place, understand where you are going to find the balances, the updates, the interest rate, where that's going to come from. Definitely is not a generative problem. You have an existing regulated system that does it for you. And the second thing is, make sure that you design the human's role in the process from the outset. Know exactly the role that the human is going to play when they access this agentic capability. Because if you don't have that understanding, a bit like the Epoch framework, you are going to get yourself into trouble because you're going to think that the AI is going to be doing a lot of things that are supposedly and traditionally something that humans expect from other humans. And those other humans are the representative of the companies that they work for. You need to bring the two worlds into one to make them work.
Thank you. I think that was really brilliant. I really liked bringing the two worlds together and knowing that humans and technology have a place and can coexist. And it's not going to be, we're not going to be, I've never seen Terminator, but taken over by the robots.
I know you really should watch it. And I think that in a utopian world, there are no humans. It's just automated. Everybody can just do their own thing.
There are a number of thank yous in the chat. I think this was a really great session. Thank you to everyone who joined. And thank you, Jay, for presenting.